Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, brought to you by TechStrong and Everbridge. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of TechStrong Learning. We have an exciting presentation ahead, but first, I have a couple of housekeeping notes to cover. First off, today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion or you would like to rewatch, the on-demand will be made available shortly after we conclude our webinar today. If you have any questions for our speaker today, we want you to go ahead and submit those using the Q&A panel on the right side of your screen. And if you want to engage in conversation with the rest of your audience members, we want you to use the chat tab. Finally, at the conclusion of today's webinar, we will have a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so stick around. So our topic at hand today is the evolving role of digital operations in establishing cyber resiliency. And I'm joined by Bill Reese, Product Marketing Director at Everbridge. Bill, I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor, but thank you so much for being here with me today.
No, I appreciate y'all having me, Cody. I thank you for that. So let's go ahead and let me share out the slides real quick. Still getting used to this platform, so hopefully everybody can see the slides. We'll be good to go. So let's talk about evolving role of digital operations. And when we refer to digital operations, exactly what that is and how it's going to impact or affect cyber resiliency, or more in line of how it can help you with cyber resiliency. So as we look at different aspects of things, we have to understand that we are and need and want to be successful as an organization, regardless of what it is, regardless of what we produce, regardless of what our business is. We want to be successful. And the biggest way to do that is to make and deliver products that customers love, disruption free. Now, those products could be ones that you resell, could be ones that you've created on your own, ones that you're continually building and developing and growing, and whatever it is, it's being able to deliver those to your customers, whether internal or external. And what I mean by that is, externals, if you're looking at business to business or business to customer, internal being those people within the organization that you are responsible for delivering services to. So as we look at that, we start dealing with what's happening in the world today, and there's many more that can be added to this, but I want to focus on 3 different ones. Number one is, even though there have been seizures, cybercrime continues to increase minute by minute, proving that crime does pay. Now, you know, when I was a kid, that was one of those things that they used to say, right? A crime doesn't pay. Well, nowadays it kind of does, until you get caught, and then there's the bad side, right? When we start looking at things like return to work or future of work processes and programs, it's understanding that some of those policies are put in place, but we are not prepared for just different cyber attacks that may happen because of those. When everybody shifted to remote working, whether they were doing it existing or whether they were just increasing the amount of remote workers, nobody was ready for that. And because of that, there were a lot of holes or openings, if you will, that different hackers and we'll just say groups exploited to dive in, get to databases that they've been looking for a long time ago. And now it's like, oh, now they're all available because of that. And then last, as I mentioned a second ago, when we started moving to that remote workforce, a lot of companies are still trying to recover. There are many companies, I live in Western Montana, there are many companies that they just keep the doors closed. It's not worth it. If they are trying to keep the lights on, they're not staffed enough because of the remote workforce or because of COVID or because of fill in the blank. And what happens is that then there's the trade-off. Do we invest in a new employee? Okay, great. That we may can afford that as it is, but it's that ramp up time, right? How much is it going to cost us to ramp up? Then you have to deal with benefits. Then you have to deal with insurance. Then you have to deal with, the list goes on. Is it worth actually keeping the lights on or just folding it all up? And that's the bigger question. So as we look at some of the different cybersecurity challenges and risk of 2021, I want to focus on 2 main areas. If you look at the right-hand side, right, 49% say they lack adequate tools. So, right, we need another company with more tools, or we've got all these tools and great, we can't even get them to talk to each other as it is. So we want another one. That's not good. Well, as you look at that, even if we had more tools, let's go with a perfect scenario, right? We had the appropriate tools, everything going right. 46% said we don't have enough people to actually man that. And that people portion being specifically in this case for security teams. And then take that one step further, right? 44% say if they did have the people, if we had perfect everything, great tool sets, great people, but 44% of them are not adequately trained to fit or fill that need. That becomes the bigger problem. And then when you start looking at the collaboration between legal and InfoSec, it's not just between legal and InfoSec. It is teams overall. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But it's really getting into the siloed approach of everything that's going on from, oh, it's my stuff, it's the way we do things, or the fact that the processes are not set up enough or efficiently enough to actually have that communication between different groups. And it could be anything from sales to engineering. It could be marketing to engineering. It could be marketing to sales. It could be fill in the blank. So it's not just a specific group that is not following that pattern, but it is any and all groups if you look at it from a bigger picture perspective. Now, let's actually go through what we're talking about today. First, we're going to go through some definitions. We're going to go through what happens if you don't have resiliency. What does that even look like? Because a lot of companies out there say, no, we're resilient. Okay, well, let's look at it from a different perspective. Let's manage the events. Let's make operations smoother. Modernize. Talk about modernization. What does that look like in a real world scenario, right? Visually, from end to end, what does that look like? And then how we can streamline this in the end. In other words, what can you do where you are right now to make this happen? So cyber resiliency, everybody talks about cyber attacks and that's becomes a buzzword. And if you're playing buzzword bingo, you're probably going to get a bunch of them today. But we start looking at, cyber terrorism, cyber attacks and things of that nature. But what it means is the ability to continuously deliver the intended outcome despite adverse cyber events. Okay. It's an evolving perspective. And a lot of people are sitting there going, you know what? We need to be able to bounce back should something happen. That's where resiliency comes into effect, or being a resilient company. But let's take it one step further. Great, right? The first one was from Wikipedia, which means that your coworkers, your peers are actually writing that information. Not that it's wrong. Please understand that. But it's the ability to see, hey, great, now we're looking at it from another side. So from a government perspective, whether that's good or bad, National Institute of Standards and Technology said the ability to anticipate, there's the key word, anticipate, withstand, recover, and adapt from to adverse conditions, stresses, attacks, or compromises on systems that use or enabled by cyber resources. So basically what that says is that you want to be aware of something can happen. You want to be able to, if something does happen, withstand that. If something happens and we can't withstand it, we want to be able to recover quickly from that. And that's probably the piece that I would add in that: recover quickly and then adapt for the next time. Right. And if it's any system that touches networks and or infrastructure and or the internet itself. So anything that goes outbound, regardless of how it gets there, that is definitely a breach or a place that can be exploited. The other side of that being is that, okay, we've got something behind a firewall. Great. Is there any portion of any piece of the organization that touches the internet? Then it's still, there's still the possibility of something happening. So we start breaking that down into, let's say, two other words, right? Security versus resiliency. Security is the processes, resources, and measures designated to protect assets from cyber terrorists, right? And I'll let you read the rest of it. But what we start dealing with is the fact that you've got people that want PII, personal information, right? People getting credit card information, getting social security information, getting stock information, getting anything and everything that's available. Because honestly, for me to go in and steal a person's identity, you're looking at a minimum of $10,000 to get paid for it. So I get paid $10,000 for a list of 100 names. That's not a bad payday, and it goes back to that crime does pay. However, you look at all the ramifications of that. So I get $10,000, but how much does it cost that person should they get their identity stolen? It's a lot of money. I can go ahead and tell you that. I know from personal experience. The other side of that is the resilience side of things, right? When we talk about resilience, and we talk about that specifically today, it encompasses both security and business resilience, right? Being able to adapt and say, hey, we can prevent or reduce the number of cyber attacks, great. But remember that business is keeping the lights on thing. Yeah, it's making sure that you're able to, as a business, reinforce or recover from that. And I liken it to winds blowing high up here in Montana, and the trees bend, but they don't break, right? That becomes a resilient tree. But for those that break, that is not resilience. And that's kind of the simplistic way to look at it from an overall perspective. Now, when we start dealing with things like cybersecurity breaches, these numbers are not made up. I promise you. I researched them enough to really start looking into that and going, no way. $40,000 is kind of an average as far as numbers go. We look at 25% have paid out between 20 and 40,000. But if you look at the second sentence, we're seeing ransom demands of more than $40 million per incident. I don't know about y'all, but that's going to take down a company in its infancy for sure. Even well-made companies. You look at some of the bigger names, right? You look at any of the Wall Street companies. You look at any of the big tech companies. If $40 million is a hit, number one, what's the data worth? What's the information worth? What's the code worth? And then what is the futures worth, right? So what else are we dealing with? Not just the existing application, but what is the intellectual property for the company that's actually being affected as well? So the other thing that caught my attention on this slide is the number that starts with a 9, right? $945 trillion. I don't think I've ever seen a slide that has that many numbers on it, or that many zeros on it. So that one really kind of hit me really hard. And you see the sources from that. All right. So what happens if you're not resilient? What does it look like? Well, we deal with the fact that it's hard to manage an organization, hard to manage an environment, hard to manage an infrastructure, and make it overall resilient. So we start dealing with operational silos. We talked about this a little bit while ago when we looked at that first chart, right? Companies and groups and agencies, they don't talk to each other, right? You've got one part that says, oh, we've got this information. You've got another one that says, oh, we've got this information. I was in a meeting not too long ago where one department was building out a new product, and then the other department said, no, we've already started that. And it was an interesting conversation after that, but they had already been working on it, but nobody knew. So there was no communication between those two different departments. And I, as a mediator, I'm going, there's your first problem, right? Communication's got to happen. So when we start breaking that out, then you start dealing with things like tools, different processes, different systems. And in those specific ones, we start dealing with it overall of, oh, okay, are we dealing with email? Well, that's okay if we're dealing with email, but what does that mean from a service perspective? And then what does it mean from a tools perspective? How many tools does it take to run email? That's where you start dealing with some of those hiccups, if you will. And if we look at it from a logistical or prepared thing, especially when you start dealing with resilience, this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with spaghetti, a spaghetti chart, if you will, that going in all different directions, right? And for me, being OCD, this slide makes me nuts because I just want to straighten out all those lines. But the problem is the reality is that's not true. It's not going to happen. We have to start looking at being able to bridge those gaps between the different operational groups and the different tools and the different processes, specifically the processes, to make sure that the silos are less of a silo. I won't say that they won't be silos, but there'll be less of a silo, if that makes sense. But then we start taking it one step further, right? It's okay to have all those applications inside, internal, and we're using those different processes. We're dealing with the different groups and companies and things of that nature, or the different teams or actual operational areas. But when we start looking at the integration to other tool sets, that becomes the bigger problem. Because if we were to get a feed from, we'll say 5 of these, then we're dealing with 5 feeds. Is it bi-directional? Okay, well, now we're dealing with 10. Oh, well, wait a minute. How many areas does that actually feed? And you start dealing with that process as well. Again, more spaghetti. Being able to go in and straighten this out becomes a big problem. And that is why it's difficult to manage. However, this is also why it's hard to be cyber resilient. So if you don't, and you're not cyber resilient, you start looking at things like this and you start going, wait, it's just too much, right? It becomes overwhelming. So if we look at some of the common challenges we're dealing with, not just the cybersecurity and cyber attacks that we're dealing with earlier, but looking at the different challenges that we're having internally, operationally. What does this mean? Too many customer impacts. Now, again, I'm going to remind you, customers could be who we are selling to or who we are servicing internally. So it's a both internal and external customer when we look at it from that perspective. Because of that, you look at the different operational groups, the different development groups, they're having problems going in and building new services or updating those services because they're too busy dealing with those other impacts to customers, attacks, things that are just not working right. That's on top of the things that we deal with automatically. Hey, you know what? We need to go change a line of code. Did somebody comment out a line of code? Did somebody uncomment a line of code? I've seen it on both sides. And the problem is that we try to deal with those specific processes on a day-to-day basis, but the other side becomes, wait, I'm dealing with these other fires that are causing a bigger impact to that's going on and making it more difficult. And that goes down to that wasted time fixing issues. We're not able to go in and automate those resolutions. And because of that, it becomes more of a headache and a pain to go in and do what we're supposed to be doing or what we're hired for. The third one cracks me up. I use this quite often because it's kind of like a free puppy, right? We get this free software. I won't name any names, but I think you know the one I'm talking about. We get this free software and we get locked into that. And in that lock-in, it's free, right? Oh, well, we need to do this. Well, it's free. No, it's a free puppy, right? You still have to go in and maintain it. You still have to go in and make sure that it's working correctly. You still have to provide that service for your internal customers and or external customers. You still have to make sure that any updates are happening, and the list continues to grow. So it's not just hey, we got a free application, but because we're locked into that, maybe we have an enterprise service agreement. I kind of give you a little bit more of a hint of who I'm referring to. Because we have that, we can't go in and buy another application. But then there's the other side of it, right? Is there's some little groups and outliers that are going in and buying their own applications to make sure that things are happening. And they're trying to deal with both of those from let me get the services for the customer, whether internal, external, and then also dealing with my specific application in order to do my job more efficiently. Now, sometimes those overlap. Sometimes it make it easier. Sometimes it, in the long run, makes it difficult. And that's what we start dealing with. And then we look at back to that last one that we've talked about over and over about operational silos. 50% of technical leaders, 50% is what gets me, say that silos of tools and data prevent collaboration when it matters most. So if you were to get attacked, if you were to get a hit, if you were to get a bump in the road, who is actually conversing to make sure that these things, number one, don't happen again? And then number two, to make sure that we're getting that proper data. Remember the example I gave you earlier from the meeting I was mediating about the lack of communication. All right, so how do we work right now to make things smoother? Well, we start dealing with the fact that now we can have a defense, which means that we need to plan to act and protect against service disruptions. Now, there's two different factors in looking at defense mechanisms, right? Number one, we have to look at the point of, do we do nothing? Is it worth it? Okay, we're great. We got a ransomware attack, and I've seen this in the news, and it cracks me up to where they'll go ahead, take it. We've got a backup system that we'll have up and running in about 5 minutes. So you keep that and we're not paying you a dime. So we do nothing. What is the effect that happens if you do nothing? Okay. Is it wise to do that or not? That's part of the plan, right? I'm not telling you to do one or the other. The other is that if we look at it from a planning perspective, we then have to prioritize and say that if this happens, it's an if then statement, right? If then, if this, then that. We need to make sure we prioritize and say these are the things that have to happen immediately. And then we go to the secondary stage, tertiary stage, and the list goes on. So being able to have that plan in place is the very, very beginning, because without a plan, you fail. We also need to make sure we have sufficient risk mitigation. What I mean by that is when we look at what do we do? How do we do? Are we going to keep backups? And if that's the case, that's great. Are we going back to the off-site storage, right? Are we going back to the, no, we've got a backup, but it's actually encrypted and it is in a stationary machine that's in a closet that is not touching anything. We just take and we put it in there and then that's it, right? It's kind of that locker syndrome, if you will. And then in that, do we have the ability to deliver agile iterations rapidly? Now, note that keyword, right? Rapidly, for faster responses. If something were to happen, if there was a worm, a Trojan horse, or if we're looking at just a DDoS attack, great. What can we do to mitigate that for the future? And then quickly reiterate or iterate, or what iteration are we going to put in to actually make sure that it doesn't impact the rest of the environment? Do we have the ability to do that? That's some of the questions you have to ask. Because everything's changing, that becomes the bigger factor. And we have to make sure that we're learning on a day-to-day basis, not just looking at it from a perspective of, oh, hey, this is the plan, let's be done with it. That's not quite how that works. And if we look at this becomes the next factor in that. Continuous response, right? We have to have that response. We have to be able to go in and have the communication with the cross-functional teams. Putting that plan in place goes in and says, okay, if we have a specific item, that's great, but who else needs to know about this information? What does it look like from an overall perspective? And then making sure that we are adaptive in the responses. It's one thing to put in a plan and to be so rigid about it that we can't do anything outside of that and then have the attack hit on the outside, right? That becomes the bigger part. And that weakens the resiliency of the attack. It weakens the resiliency, against the attack. It weakens the resiliency of your operations and makes it even more difficult when you start looking at phase 2. What are we doing the next time? What happens should this happen again? And what's on the horizon that may come down the pipe? And that's what we start dealing with, is making sure that we have the flexibility and fluidity to ensure that this is not going to happen again, or be prepared if it does. Now, in an overall perspective, great. We can go in, we can make those plans, but we want to take it one step further, right? If we want to go in and make things modern, make it very, very resilient, we start dealing with automation from an overall perspective. And automation can be, many different facets, but we have to start asking some specific questions. Where is the event coming from? Are we actually getting that information from a feed of ITSM system or source system or a SIM system, or fill in the blank? And if we are we filtering that information to where it's relevant for us? And are we going to go in and prioritize that information, right? And remember, going back to the plan, what's the prioritization? And if we prioritize, do we have context around what happens? I've been with several different companies to where they will provide information, but it's only this, right? It's only this bit of information. And the problem with that is it doesn't give us a clear picture so that we can go in and make informed decisions. When my kids, I've got 3 of them, when they come in, they're all adults now, and they have a problem, I say, you got to give me some more information. You've got to give me the context. How does this apply to you? Where are you getting this information from? What are we going to do with it once we resolve this problem? And when they come to me with the context, then I can start dealing with a resolution and making sure that it's flexible to fit the new specific issue and or any future issues should we need to do so. Who needs the information? We need to make sure that we're targeting the key individuals, whether it is a service owner, whether it is somebody that's just supporting it, whether it is somebody that's building the service, whether it is a stakeholder. And what I mean by that is it could be a C-level, could be a VP level, could be a director. Getting them the information so that they're all informed at the time they need to be, to ensure that adaptable decisions can be made. And again, that comes back to that context perspective, right? Being able to see things from a bigger picture and have their viewpoint, because they're looking at it not from this, they're looking at it from a higher level, and actually being able to provide more information because they're able to look at it from a higher perspective, because this is what they do. What effect does it have? And this was kind of the example I gave you a while ago about being able to go in and see from my kids, what effect is it going to have if we do make a decision? What effect does it have if we don't make a decision? That becomes the bigger picture. What effect is it going to have on the entire process? And what effect does it have on each individual person? And what effect does it have on the business as a whole as we move forward? Is it a $2 problem? Is it a $2 billion problem? That's what we start looking at. So getting that full context and looking around, not just the services, but the dependencies of it. So it's not just the one thing, but it's everything that supports it as we look at it from a bigger picture. We also need to make sure we have that rapid response. What I mean by this is, as we look at it from a digital operations perspective, we start focusing on the ability to say, what can we do automatically without human intervention? If you have an attack in the middle of the night, nobody's manning the store, what happens, right? We have to go in, we have to wake up that person. We have to make sure that they get the context. They have to read through the context. Then they have to make the decision, do I actually do something? Oh, okay. Well, then do I have to go into the office to do that? Or do I go, can I do it from here? Or can I do it fill in the blank? So there's a lot of different aspects and perspectives. We have to look at it from a automated perspective. Being able to go in and say, once we filter out that information, once we prioritize it, then we want to do this. So it's an if-then statement again. We want to be able to go in and do this automatically, and then get the notification, hey, this is exactly what the system did for us. So now we are, in this case, resilient, right? We also, should we not be able to do that automatically, we also want to be able to have actionable notifications. Again, notifying that person in the middle of the night is great, but if they have to go in and say, okay, well, I'm not sure what to do, let me go look at the run book and find out what's happening. No, let's go in and know what our run book looks like and give an actionable notification. Not just to the point of saying, hey, do you want to reboot a server, or do you want to restart the service? Do you want to run a backup log? But taking it one step further by saying, hey, not only are we doing this, but last time this happened, this is what you did. So it's getting that overall view of what's going on and knowing, hey, this is what's already also what has already been done. So if you've got somebody that's already tried to run a backup, if you already got somebody that's tried to roll back a change and it didn't work, then what, right? They need that information and be able to act upon it. And then the last part is understanding, not just from a granular level of what happened, but being able to look at it from, again, that bigger picture, right? It's the service intelligence to go in and review what happened, making after action reports, looking at shareable dashboards to be able to go and see to everybody what's happened. If we share that operational dashboard, and it could be anything that's going on, share that operational dashboard, we want to make sure that everybody's looking at it from the same picture, even though they're looking at it through their lens, right? It's the same picture, right? And the old story goes back to, I'm looking through a fence. Three buddies of mine are looking through a fence, through a hole in the fence, and they see this thing, right? And they're all looking at an elephant, but one of them says, oh, the elephant is a rope. Or one of them says the elephant is a hose. One of them say the elephant is a tree trunk. So it's being able to see it from those lenses, but the bigger picture being over the fence where we're looking at it as an elephant, right? Being able to identify it and then determine, okay, what do we do with it next time should this happen? Again, remember, your plan is not just about what happened, but being able to adjust that plan to say, if this happens again, specifically this, then we do this. And then should this happen, right? Moving it even further. What if scenarios, being able to do tabletop exercises, things of that nature. But then there are some times where you go in and say, no, we did good. Everybody gets an A, everybody gets a gold star because we did a great job. There's no change in this, but you still need to do those what ifs, right? Great. We held up great this time, but maybe not the next time. So that's the way we start looking at things. Now, let's look at it from a product perspective, and I don't want to get into a demo. We'll just talk about it from a high level schematic perspective. If we start dealing with it from a point of, we're getting different feeds. Remember, we talked about, where's this information coming from? It could be that we're looking at Splunk logs. It could be that we're looking at New Relic information. Remember the SIM SOAR, remember the ITSM systems, being able to have that, but being able to have the automated information as well, finding out what did we do, how did we do, where did we get that information, and then did it come from an ITSM event? That ITSM incident could be one of those areas where we start dealing with it from a long-term perspective, such as the the number used to be 86%. 86% of all incidents that are in their ITSM system were reported by end users. That is a big number, and one of those areas where we start dealing with it from a, do we have the ability to be more proactive? Do we have the ability to be reactive? If so, how are we going to do that? But we deal with it from a, let's look at it from a centralized point, and then go in and say, okay, we're now feeding information to those other systems. But it's not just feeding information to those other systems or receiving information from those other systems, but it's being able to have it bi-directionally, being able to update the system should we need to do so. So if we look at ServiceNow as an example, again, just an example, could be Jira, could be Sharewell, could be Remedy, could be Remedy, for whatever it is, whatever system it is, it's being able to go in and say, not only am I receiving that information, but it could be that I'm pushing information back up. What happened? What did we do? What was the resolution? Or it could be, hey, we recognize this from a Splunk log. We did these things. Let's go and create an incident in ServiceNow or Jira in this case. Then the other side of it comes down to that bi-directional flow. We continually update to ensure that they're getting the right information, and to ensure that the your source of truth is actually getting updated like it needs to be, right? Again, everybody looking at it from a holistic approach and having that cross-functional dashboard, so to speak. Well, great. We also need to make sure that we're attaching information to provide it to resolvers, making sure that they're the ones going in and pushing the button at the end of the day and saying, did I have enough information to make a wise decision? But you also need to meet them where they are. So you look at all the different tool sets you have within your organization, and you start dealing with it. Okay, well, I'm in Slack, somebody else is in Teams. Which one do we use? Use both, right? Being able to provide information to each one of those, create a channel in each one of those, to then go in and say, hey, you're getting the data where you need it. You're getting the data where you need it. And we're also updating the system. And we are creating a conference bridge so you can go in and have a conversation should you want to do that. So it's a bigger picture from that perspective. And then last but not least is making sure that the stakeholders are involved by keeping them updated, whether it's through something like status page, whether it is through email, whether it's just through text, whether it's through desktop notification to say, hey, we've now done this and we are cleared for the next step. The biggest piece of this, and I'll give you an example. I was in a, we'll just say a federal building. And in that federal building, I was in one of the areas, and all of a sudden this red light just started going off, flashing. And I hear something coming over the loudspeaker, unplug every machine. For me, that was kind of, number one, it was like, oh, this is cool. Number two, it was like, oh my gosh, what the crap is happening? And in that, it was one of those areas where I never got the information. I never found out what was going on. I never knew what was going on. I suspected. And that was one of the areas where I started looking at, are they getting the right information? How are we automating this? Should they have been able to go in and isolated that subnet, isolated that entire IP range, should something bad have happened? So that's the different way to look at it. Or with IoT nowadays, the Internet of Things, being able to literally shut off all the power at that area. So it's a couple of different ways to look at that overall. So how do we take this information and how do we actually streamline this to make sure that we're protected against service operations? How do we act against those things? Well, first off, we have to understand, why does it even matter? Is it a financial hit? Is it a personnel hit? Is it a customer hit? And what I mean by that is are we going to lose customers because of it? Is it a brand hit? In other words, does it affect your brand to where now that's the bigger impact? Okay, so when you look at brand impacts, we need to make sure that we're shortening the mean time to resolve, which means that from beginning to end, from the time of no to the time of resolution, we need to make sure that time is a lot shorter. Again, automation is going to help you with that, but being able to streamline that to make sure that it's continual. We did this last time. Great. Is there something that needs to be improved? And that's where we start getting back to that service intelligence that we were talking about a while ago. Is there a fluid business motion? I apologize. I know some of you see me look off to the sides. I get people that are walking by waving at me, and I'm like, look, I'm in a car. It's just the way it goes. So the fluid business motion and remarkable customer experiences make sure that if we're adapting, then it's still providing that great customer experience that they've come to know and love, as opposed to one for them to go, I'm done. Right? You look at Amazon attack, you look at Walmart.com attack, look at Target.com attack, look at Target as a whole. Are they given a great customer experience? Right? And that's where you start dealing with, if it takes me forever to load the Amazon app and or website, what am I going to do? You know, am I such a loyal customer that I'll go back to that? Or am I going to go straight to Walmart? Well, if they're under attack, then guess what happens? I have to go to the next one, the next one, the next one. Depending on how urgent it is and how we're going to adapt to that specific operation, that specific disruption. And then from an overall perspective, how do we make sure it doesn't happen in the future, right? Then we have to understand from a financial aspect, what is the impact? If services are continue to be available to customers, I kind of mentioned a lot of this a moment ago, but if services are going to continue to be available to customers, what are they going to do? All right, they're going to stay, they're going to be happy. It's going to be one of those areas where we look at the repeat customer business. However, if we get, let's say, the first time they ever come to a site and that site gets a hit, then what? How does that impact us? And what is that going to do for the next time? Are they going to come back? No, I got a bad taste in my mouth. I'm not doing it. I actually was dealing with a new client the other week. They sent me their email address. They sent me their website, and I clicked on the website. It didn't come up. And that was, I will tell you, that was a bad taste in my mouth. They weren't asking for help for resiliency. They weren't asking. They were just trying to sell me something. And I'm like, no, we're done. That's it. There's no way. So if they're on the call, fix your site, and then we'll go from there. But then we also look at it from a perspective of how much does that cost per minute. Gartner actually says that $5,600 a minute for a major outage is about right. Ponymon Institute about 3 years ago said it was $10,000 a minute. Gartner said, no, let's be a little more realistic. For a major incident, this is about average. Ponymon Institute was looking at one specific outage and type. And because of that, they labeled that one, and everybody took that information and said, oh, it's $10,000. No, it's not. You have to deal with what service is being impacted. You have to look at what are the supporting independent services that we're dealing with. What does it cost to fix it? What does it cost to update it? What does it cost to build a new one? If you're creating agile processes and delivering code on a regular basis, is that included in this, right? Are we dealing with it from a dollars and cents perspective, personnel perspective, or code perspective? How are we delivering that information, again, to make that happy customer and make sure that those customers return? So it's not just about a happy customer, but it's also making sure that you've got returning customers. All right, so that being said, I'm going to go in and I'm going to turn it back over to Cody, see if we've got any questions, and we'll go from there.
All right, Bill. So I'm looking at our questions, and I'll also take this time to let our audience know to go ahead and send in any questions that you might have come up with during today's webinar, and we have plenty of time to address those. All right. So our first question that we've received reads, what is the enterprise architecture role guiding and governing the cyber resiliency need across the infrastructure and operational environments?
What is the enterprise architectural role guiding and governing the cyber resiliency? So typically we're looking at it from anything. Oh, thanks. Typically anybody that is dealing with it from a CISO level, a CIO level, or even a CSO level, those are the ones that are start looking at it from an internal governance perspective. Now, I'm breaking this into two different areas, right? You got an internal governance perspective, what's happening in your organization. From an external organization, NIST is typically the ones that are saying, hey, this is what you need to deal with. This is the actual plan in place that needs to be dealt with. And I'll be honest with you, me as well as several other security team members, they and we go in and look at NIST as our standard to go in and make sure that we're getting proper information and plans in place.
All right, and I'll go ahead and put up our next question, but it reads, What tools can be used to document the holistic view of data flow, backup processes, store location, other groups, and their usage of said data in such a manner that staff and team can understand the process?
There is a big, I'll say that's a hurdle, right? Is making sure that it's in terms where everybody can understand. I think I don't know specifically what tool, and I'll go ahead and be honest about that. I don't know what tool. However, when you look at it, and I'll deal with a couple of different examples, right? When you look at it from a digital perspective, you can have a workflow set up, and then at that point, once that has been mapped out, once that automated process has been created, being able to go in and print that out and then add the additional pieces, right? So somebody may say, well, I don't understand the connection between this tool and this tool, or this tool and this chat ops program. Can you explain it to me? Well, that's where you start filling in the words, right? Whether it's manually or whether you're taking that picture and putting in a PowerPoint presentation, or going in and using something like Flow, or looking at, there's a couple of other ones out there and the names escape me. One of them looks like it literally looks like a bunch of Post-its on a board. I used it at one point. It was pretty good. And then I ended up using real Post-its on my wall at the office.
All right, Bill. So I'm not seeing any more questions at this point in time, but I will give our audience another minute or two to send in any that they might have. In the meantime, I'll go ahead and give away some gift cards before we check back that Q&A box. So these are for four $25 Amazon gift cards. Our first winner is Ray A. Our second winner is Devin D. Our third winner is Bento E. And our fourth and final winner is Julie H. So congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card. And if you don't see that email, just check your spam folder. I'll also take this time to remind our audience that today's session was recorded. So if you missed any of our session, you can rewatch it. You'll receive an email shortly after we conclude today with a link to access that on-demand recording. So, Bill, I am not seeing any more questions from our audience. So I'll go ahead and give you the floor one more time just to close us out.
Yeah, folks, I really appreciate the time that y'all have taken to spend with me. And I'll go ahead and leave you with this, right? Is first step is plan. Make sure that you've got a plan in place, and then it becomes the second step is actually initiate it. If you just have a plan written out and it's just sitting in a book somewhere or sitting on a piece of paper somewhere and nobody acts upon it, you can't do it. I plan to go to the gas station, fill up the truck. If I don't do it, then I'm going to run out of gas and be on the side of the road. So that's where we start looking at the ability to put that in place, and then taking to where you're more resilient in the future.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today, despite your internet connectivity issues and the incoming storm. So stay warm as this snowstorm comes up to Montana this week.
I appreciate that.
Of course. I'd like to thank Everbridge for sponsoring today's webinar, and I would finally like to thank you, our audience. We really appreciate you being here with us today. Please take a moment to fill out our post-webinar survey, and I hope to see you at a future Tech Strong Learning webinar. This is Cody J. Brown signing off. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Bye, y'all.